I'm Ellen Blake, 68 years old, once the indispensable right hand at a prestigious law firm in Atlanta, where I orchestrated everything with the precision of a Swiss watch. For 30 years as an executive secretary, I never missed a call, a signature, or a deadline. When the spotlight of my career dimmed, I thought I'd step into a new, quieter chapter alongside my son Daniel, my daughter-in-law Jessica, and my two young grandchildren in their spacious suburban home. That house, I poured nearly my entire life savings into it, a hefty sum from bonds and certificates to help them buy it. When Daniel invited me to live with them, my heart raced. I pictured cozy family dinners, children's laughter, and the sense of belonging to a family, something I'd craved since my beloved husband passed away 10 years ago. Those early days felt like a dream. I cooked fragrant dinners, drove the kids to school, folded laundry neatly, and felt gratitude in Daniel's tight hugs or Jessica's sweet thank yous. I blended into the rhythm of their family life, believing I'd found my safe harbor. But amid the soft glow of the living room, an invisible shadow began to creep in. Something was off, a vague but sharp feeling, as if I were standing on ground about to crack. I couldn't have known that in the very home I helped build, I'd soon become a ghost, sidelined by cold smiles and words as sharp as knives. I didn't notice it at first, maybe because I was so used to adapting, to brushing aside uneasy feelings, like I once tidied stacks of documents on my desk. But in Daniel and Jessica's home, a cold draft began to blow through, not strong enough to rattle the windows, but enough to make me shiver. It came in small details, subtle shifts that I might have missed if I weren't paying attention. But I'm Ellen Blake, the woman who memorized every detail in 100-page contracts. I don't miss signs, no matter how small. It started with the daily routines. When I first moved in, I took on most of the household tasks without being asked. I woke early to prepare breakfast, toast and eggs for Daniel, organic cereal for the kids, and a black coffee for Jessica, just the way she liked it. I packed lunches for Nana and Charlie, carefully arranging apple slices and crackers in their boxes, slipping in a note that read, "Have a great day," like I used to do for Daniel when he was young. I drove the kids to school, picked them up, and back home. I cleaned the kitchen, folded laundry, or organized the pantry. Jessica would smile, call me a lifesaver, and Daniel would hug me tightly before rushing out to work. I felt needed, like an essential piece of the family puzzle. But then one morning, I walked into the kitchen to find everything already done. The kids' lunchboxes were neatly lined up by the front door, coffee brewed, even the tablecloth replaced. Jessica stood there, hair tied high, in crisp athletic wear, wiping the counter with brisk efficiency. "Take a break, Mom," she said, her voice soft but with a certain finality. "I've got it covered." I smiled, thanked her, thinking it was just a one-off day of her taking charge. But the next day, and the day after, the scene repeated. The lunches I used to pack were now inspected, adjusted, or entirely replaced by Jessica. Once, I saw her remove the apple slices I'd cut and swap them for intricately carved carrot sticks. "The kids prefer it this way," she said, not looking at me as if it were an obvious fact. I began to feel pushed out of the household's rhythm. The pantry, which I'd meticulously organized with labeled spice jars, was restructured by Jessica. She tossed my labels, replacing them with unlabeled glass containers, minimalist in what she called a modern style. Once, when I asked where the baking powder was, she just smiled, not looking up from her phone, and said, I'm simplifying things. Hope you don't mind. I said it was fine, but inside, I felt like a piece of my presence in that kitchen had been erased. The changes didn't stop there. Jessica started planning weekly meals without consulting me. She scheduled the kids' dental appointments, signed their field trip forms, and even took over the laundry. Tasks I'd done naturally. I tried suggesting I cook something, like the meat casserole Daniel loved as a kid, but Jessica would nod and then switch to a lighter salad at the last minute. "Mom, people eat like this now for health," she'd say, her tone soft but cutting, as if my cooking belonged to a bygone era. I began to wonder if I was imagining this coldness, or if I was truly being sidelined in the home I'd helped create. What hurt most was how I was introduced to outsiders. When friends or neighbors visited, Jessica would say, "This is Daniel's mom, Ellen. She's staying with us." The word staying hit like a jab. Not living, not part of the family, just staying, as if I were a temporary guest, a passerby with no roots in this space. Once, at a neighborhood party I'd helped prepare, cleaning, arranging fruit, setting tables, Jessica stood up to thank everyone, boasting about how she'd done it all herself. Not a word about me. I stood in the kitchen corner, holding an empty water glass, listening to their laughter and feeling like a ghost, present but unseen. Daniel, my son, seemed oblivious. He was busy with work, often coming home late, tired, and distracted. His morning hugs dwindled to rushed nods. When I tried to share how I felt, he'd just laugh, saying, "Mom, Jessica's just trying to keep things organized. Don't overthink it." I wanted to believe him, to think I was blowing things out of proportion. But then, one afternoon, I overheard Jessica on the phone in the backyard. Her voice was clear and sharp as she told someone on the other end, "No, we don't need another loan. Daniel's mom contributed a big chunk for the house." Yeah, exactly. But it was a gift, so we didn't put her name on the deed. The word gift pierced my chest like a knife. I'd cashed out my entire savings bonds, liquidated certificates of deposit, money I'd scrimped and saved my whole life to help them buy this house. It wasn't a spontaneous gift. It was an investment, an act of love, but also a belief that I'd have a place in this family. Yet, in one careless sentence, Jessica erased my contribution, turning it into a generous gesture that required no reciprocation. I stood there, gripping the railing, feeling the ground beneath me crumble. That night, I lay in bed, the faint glow of the bedside lamp casting shadows on the ceiling. I didn't cry, didn't rage, but something in me woke up. I started seeing everything with sharper eyes. I realized Jessica's actions weren't random. She wasn't just controlling the house, she was controlling my presence, pushing me into a corner where I was only allowed to exist if I was silent, useful, and invisible. I recalled my years at the law firm, overhearing powerful men say, "Just let it be, it's easier that way." Jessica didn't say those words, but her eyes and smiles said the same. I began to act, quietly and carefully. As I once organized critical documents for attorneys, I pulled a locked suitcase from the closet corner, opened it, and retrieved an old folder. Inside were the papers I'd brought when I moved here, bank transfer receipts, confirmations, and a chain of emails between me and Daniel discussing the money I contributed to the house. Nothing fancy, just numbers and signatures, but they were proof, truth inked in black on white paper. I read each line, each date, and felt like I was reclaiming myself. I took it a step further, drawing on my law firm days. I copied all the documents, stashing one set in a knitting basket, hidden under unused skeins of yarn. The other I mailed to myself, leaving the envelope unopened, letting the postmark serve as evidence. An old attorney once taught me this trick. Mail it, Ellen, and keep it sealed. It's not a contract, but it's enough to make people pause. I did exactly that, feeling like I was building an invisible wall around myself. Then I called John Whitmore. John was a veteran attorney from the firm, a longtime friend with a calm smile and eyes that missed nothing. We'd shared lunches, Christmas cards, and once danced together at a retirement party. When he picked up, his voice was as warm as ever. "Ellen Blake," he said, "how many people have you sued since retiring?" I laughed, but my tone was serious as I told him everything. We met at a small coffee shop a few days later. I brought the folder of documents. John brought a notebook and the calm I always admired. I laid it all out, from being sidelined in household tasks to Jessica's phone call about the gift. I kept my voice steady, no trembling, no tears blurring the story. When I finished, John looked at me for a long moment before saying, "Most people wouldn't see this until it's too late. You saw it, you documented it, that matters." We discussed options, legal and non-legal. John suggested drafting a formal letter, requesting an accounting of my contribution, and a review of property ownership. I said, "Not yet, unless it's necessary." I didn't want war, I wanted control, the sense that I wasn't a leaf drifting in someone else's current. After the meeting, I felt steadier, as if my feet had finally touched solid ground. After a long time floating, I started watching more closely. I noticed Jessica lowering her voice when I entered a room, as if hiding something. Daniel avoided my eyes when talking about money or future plans. My name slowly vanished from conversations about the house, vacations, anything tied to permanence. I stopped blaming myself. There's a strange loneliness in realizing you're merely tolerated, not valued. But there's also power in facing it, in choosing not to beg for love where only silence answers. I didn't confront, didn't hint, didn't fling accusations into the air. Instead, I gathered facts, fortified my boundaries, and waited. A gut feeling told me the moment was coming. The moment they'd try to diminish me once more. And this time, I wouldn't bow. I'd stand tall, and I'd be ready. I stood before the mirror in my small bedroom, the light from the table lamp casting shadows on my face. It had been a long time since I'd looked at myself so closely, not to check for wrinkles or gray hair, but to find myself, the woman who once ran a law office with the precision and resolve of a conductor. Tonight, I wouldn't just be Daniel's mom, Nana and Charlie's grandma, or the silent shadow in this house. Tonight, I'd be Ellen Blake, the woman who wouldn't let anyone rewrite her story. I slipped into a navy blue dress, its silk lining soft against my skin, a dress I'd worn only once, for Daniel's college graduation. I pinned my mother's silver brooch to my chest, pulled my hair back with careful deliberation. In the mirror, I saw a woman not just present, but powerful, ready. It all began with a pristine white invitation, gold-trimmed, placed on my dresser Monday morning. It was an invite to Daniel and Jessica's 7th anniversary party, a grand affair with friends, colleagues, and neighbors. The note was curt, cold. "We'd love for you to join us. Formal attire, dinner at 7. No signature, no warmth, just a command disguised as courtesy." I held the card, standing by the window, watching the breeze stir the trees outside. There was something in the air, a sharp edge, like just before a storm. This wasn't their first party, but usually I was asked to watch the kids or help quietly. Pour wine, clear plates, then slip away before the real conversations began. This time, I was invited, but I knew the invitation wasn't to honor me. It was a stage, and I decided I wouldn't play a supporting role. I called John Whitmore the next day. He answered on the second ring, his voice as warm and steady as when he'd silence a boardroom with a single glance. "Ellen," he said, "who do you need me to sue this time?" I laughed, but my tone was serious as I told him about the party. My gut feeling that Jessica wouldn't miss a chance to push me further into the shadows. I didn't explain much. John understood. "Want me there?" he asked. I hesitated for a second, then said, "Yes." We agreed he'd come as an old friend from the law firm, which was true. Jessica wouldn't recognize him. She rarely cared about the details of my life, unless they served her purpose. Saturday arrived, and the house buzzed from early morning. Jessica darted around, adjusting vases, lighting candles, checking every detail with an obsession for perfection. When I stepped out of my room, she glanced at me, saying, "Oh, you're ready," before turning back to her flowers as if I were just another item to check off. I didn't respond, just gave a faint smile, my hand gripping my small purse. Inside was a slim folder, copies of the documents I'd prepared, bank transfer receipts, emails with Daniel, bank confirmations. I didn't plan to open it, but its presence was like a talisman, reminding me I wasn't walking into this battle empty-handed. Guests began arriving in small groups, the click of heels on hardwood, laughter rising in air scented with lilies and wine. I recognized a few faces from past gatherings, but most were strangers. Daniel's colleagues in sleek suits, Jessica's friends with fresh manicures and rehearsed smiles. I greeted them with polite nods, found a seat in the living room, hands clasped tightly in my lap. No one offered me a glass of wine. No one asked about my life or work. I was just Daniel's mom, a faint name in their story. John arrived on time, poised in a gray blazer and white shirt. He smiled at me the way he did during our sandwich lunches at the firm, a smile both familiar and reassuring. He shook Jessica's hand, introducing himself as my old friend from the law firm. Jessica smiled, but her eyes were blank, devoid of curiosity. "Nice to meet you," she said, then swiftly moved to the next guest. I looked at John. He nodded slightly, and I knew he was ready, not to start a fight, but to stand behind me like an unyielding wall. Dinner was served promptly, the table draped in white linen, candlelight glinting off crystal glasses. Jessica and Daniel sat at the head, while I was placed near the end, next to a woman who talked endlessly about home renovations. I listened, nodded when needed, but my mind was elsewhere. I watched Jessica, her perfect smile, her calculated gestures. Daniel, as usual, followed her lead, laughing when she laughed, nodding when she spoke. The meal passed with the clink of cutlery and small talk, but I sensed an electric charge in the air, as if the room were waiting for something. Then the moment came. Between dessert and digestives, Jessica stood, tapping her wine glass lightly, drawing every eye. She began her speech, her voice sweet but sharp, thanking everyone for coming, for supporting their journey, for witnessing her and Daniel's love and growth. She spoke of family, success, the dreams they were building. Then, as if recalling a joke, she turned to me, her smile not reaching her eyes. "And of course," she said, her tone light but cutting as a blade, "we're so grateful to have Daniel's mom here with us. Ellen's always been a quiet supporter, someone who knows her place in the background. Something so rare these days." Laughter broke out, awkward, scattered. A few eyes flicked to me, then quickly away. Daniel bowed his head, staring at his plate, silent. I felt blood rush to my ears, but I didn't tremble. I wasn't angry. I felt a cold clarity, as if everything in me had been sharpened. I reached into my purse, slowly pulling out the slim folder, placing it gently before me on the table. The sound of paper touching linen was so faint, almost no one heard. But to me it rang like a bell. Jessica kept speaking, but her voice began to waver, as if she sensed the shift in the air. I didn't interrupt. I waited, letting her finish her speech, letting the last glasses be raised. The sparse applause fade. Then I stood, unhurried, unloud. I looked around the table, my gaze lingering on each face. Strangers, acquaintances, those who'd laughed at Jessica's words. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice steady and clear. "And I think 90% of you here know the value of being seen. But sometimes, the strongest thing a woman can do is refuse to be invisible." I didn't explain. I didn't point at Jessica or Daniel. I just stood there, hand resting lightly on the folder, and looked straight at Jessica. She saw the folder, saw John sitting there, calm and still, and her face paled. Her smile froze, as if caught in ice. The room fell silent, not a comfortable silence, but the heavy kind, when truth slips into a space full of pretense. Jessica tried to salvage it. She laughed, her voice high-pitched. "Oh, Ellen, you sure know how to get attention." She raised her glass, as if to pull the room back into her orbit. But no one followed. A few coughed softly. Others looked at their plates. Daniel finally looked up, brows furrowed. But he said nothing. I didn't need him to speak. I'd said enough. I turned to John. "Would you help me to the kitchen? I need some air." He stood immediately, offering his arm, and I took it. Not because I was weak, but because I wanted them to see I wasn't alone. I had someone behind me, not to fight for me, but to witness me fight. We walked out of the dining room, my heels clicking on the hardwood, each step a declaration. I heard whispers start as we left, but I didn't look back. In the hallway, I paused, taking a deep breath. John stood beside me, silent, waiting. "You okay?" he finally asked. I nodded. I didn't want to destroy them. I just wanted them to know I'm not air. He smiled. The smile of someone who knows that sometimes victory isn't in destruction, but in standing tall. We returned to the dining room as Jessica poured coffee, her voice trying to sound cheerful, but her hand trembled slightly. I sat down, the folder still before me, unopened. I didn't need to open it. Its presence was enough, but I wanted one more moment, not to humiliate Jessica, but to affirm that I wouldn't let her rewrite my story again. "Thank you, Jessica, for a wonderful evening," I said, my voice still calm. "But I brought some documents, things I plan to discuss privately with you and Daniel. However, now might be a good time." I pulled out a single sheet, a copy of a transfer receipt, dates clear, and placed it on the table between her and Daniel. I said nothing more. I didn't need to. John spoke, his voice low and clear. "I'm John Whitmore, attorney representing Mrs. Ellen Blake. I'm here to assist her in reviewing her financial contributions to the purchase of this home and ensuring they're properly acknowledged should ownership need reassessment." He didn't accuse, didn't threaten. He stated facts, and those facts were enough to silence the room. Jessica opened her mouth, then closed it. Her face went white, her smile gone. Daniel looked at the paper, then at me, as if waking from a long dream. No one touched the coffee. No one spoke. The evening's artifice dissolved, leaving a raw truth. I was no longer the woman they could push aside. I stood, John rising with me. Thank you all for a memorable evening, I said. I looked directly at Jessica. Not with anger, not with bitterness. People may try to put you in your place, but only you decide where you belong. I'm not here to divide. I'm here to remind you that women like me, women who've given their lives without asking, aren't invisible, and we're not weak. We left, unhurried, without slamming doors. But the silence we left behind was louder than any argument. It said Jessica had tried to create a moment to shrink me, and I'd answered with a moment that forced her to see herself. I'd reclaimed my space, not by shouting, but by standing tall, with a folder of documents and a friend by my side. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't just Ellen Blake. I was a woman who refused to be erased. I woke the next morning in my small bedroom, sunlight slipping through the curtains, casting faint streaks on the hardwood floor. But the air in the house was heavy, not the peace of a Sunday morning, but a tense silence, as if the whole place was holding its breath for a storm. I brewed coffee, each movement slow, deliberate, like how I used to tidy my desk after a long day at the law firm. The hot mug in my hands, I sat by the window, looking out at the quiet suburban street. But my mind wasn't calm. Last night, at Daniel and Jessica's anniversary party, I'd stood up, placed the folder of documents on the table, and declared I wouldn't be invisible anymore. That moment echoed in me, not as a triumphant gloat, but as a quiet, profound liberation. My phone buzzed, cutting through my thoughts. It was Daniel. I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the answer button, but I didn't pick up. I wasn't ready to hear what he'd say. Maybe an apology, maybe confusion, or worse, justification. A voicemail came a few minutes later. I played it on speaker, Daniel's voice low and hesitant. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't realize things had gone this far. I wish you'd talk to me first instead of bringing a lawyer. I want to fix this, Mom, without all this." I listened, set the phone down, and gave a bitter smile. Didn't realize that was the deepest cut. Not intentional harm, but the indifference that made me invisible in my own son's eyes. But he was wrong about one thing. John wasn't escalation. He was my shield, the boundary I'd built after years of being sidelined. I didn't call back. Later that day, a text from Jessica arrived, short and icy. "You made me feel humiliated in front of my friends. I wasn't trying to push you out, but you overreacted. Can we talk?" I read it twice, searching for a hint of sincerity, but found only control. The control Jessica always wielded, now wrapped in a veneer of hurt. She didn't ask how I felt, didn't acknowledge the years I'd been pushed into the shadows. I closed the phone, didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I realized her words weren't for reconciliation. They were an attempt to pull me back to my old place, silent and manageable. In the days that followed, I met John again, at a small coffee shop, where the smell of fresh bread and the hum of the espresso machine created a warmth that contrasted with the tension inside me. I brought the folder of documents. John brought his notebook and unshakable calm. We sat across from each other, and I recounted what happened after the party. Jessica's text, Daniel's voicemail, and my certainty that I couldn't keep living in that house. John listened, occasionally jotting notes, his eyes never leaving me. "You did what most people wouldn't dare," he said. "You didn't just confront. You made them face the truth." We discussed next steps. John drafted a formal letter, demanding a clear accounting of my financial contribution to the house, and proposing a review of property ownership. The letter was written in precise legal language, polite but firm, leaving no room for ambiguity. I read each line, feeling like I was signing a contract with myself. a commitment that I'd never let my worth be erased again. I mailed the letter myself, the sealed envelope, the postmark a testament to my resolve. As I dropped it into the mailbox, I felt a cool breeze, as if I'd just opened a long-locked door. Jessica didn't respond directly, but I knew she got the letter. 3 days later, Daniel sent an email, its tone brief but anxious. He suggested we meet, saying we could sort things out without lawyers. I replied, polite but clear, I'm always open to talk, Daniel, but only if it's a conversation with respect. I won't be sidelined again. He didn't write back. His silence didn't surprise me, but it confirmed what I knew. Change doesn't come from words, but from actions, and I had acted. I began packing a few days later. The decision to leave didn't come in a burst of anger or pain. It came from clarity. I couldn't stay in a space where I was merely tolerated. I opened my suitcase, packing each item with almost ritualistic care. My favorite books, family photos from when Daniel was young, the porcelain tea set my mother left me, the shawls I'd collected over the years. I didn't take anything from the house. No plates, no glasses, not even the chair I'd sat in for hours telling the kids stories. I took only what was mine, what bore the mark of Ellen Blake. Finding a new place happened faster than I expected. I found a small apartment across town, not luxurious, but cozy, with a tiny balcony facing west, where I could watch the sunset each evening. I signed the lease with John's help, who reviewed every clause like he once did million-dollar contracts. A kind neighbor helped carry a few heavy boxes, and when the apartment door closed behind me, I stood in the empty space, taking a deep breath. For the first time in years, I felt this space was mine, not because it was grand, but because it was my own. I arranged the apartment my way. I set family photos on a shelf, not to please anyone, but because they made me smile. I bought a glass vase from a thrift store and filled it with fresh yellow daisies, placing it on the small dining table. I brewed tea in the chipped mug I loved, unconcerned if it fit Jessica's minimalist aesthetic. Each act, however small, was a declaration that I was living for myself. I lit a lavender and honey candle, letting its scent fill the room. And for the first time in years, I exhaled a long breath, free of worry, free of calculation. Daniel visited 2 weeks after I moved. He brought a bouquet of lilies, my favorite flower, and 2 coffees from the shop he used to drag me to as a kid, where he'd press his face against the glass case to ogle waffles. He stepped into the apartment, looked around, touched the back of a chair, paused at the window. This place, it's peaceful, he said, his voice low. I nodded. It is. He didn't say much, but his eyes held something different. Not overt remorse, but recognition, as if he were seeing me for the first time in ages. We sat drinking coffee, talking about the kids, his work, how his house felt a little empty without me. He didn't ask me to come back, and I was grateful for that. He stayed an hour, and when he left, he hugged me, a hug tighter than usual. You okay, Mom? He asked. I smiled, better than ever. Jessica didn't reach out, not a call, not a text. At first, I wondered if I should feel hurt, but then I realized her silence wasn't punishment. It was space, and I'd learned to breathe in that space. I didn't need reconciliation to move forward. Some chapters don't end with handshakes or apologies. They just close. I began building a new rhythm. I volunteered at a community legal aid office once a week, doing simple tasks like filing, answering phones, or making coffee for young attorneys. The interns saw me as a kind old lady bringing muffins, unaware I'd once typed briefs that brought tears in courtrooms. or that I could spot a contract flaw from a mile away. I didn't need them to know. I knew, and that was enough. I joined a book club at the local library, where women in their 60s and 70s gathered every Thursday, rain or shine. We read everything from romance novels to memoirs, and we debated about love, loss, regret, and growing up. They didn't care who I'd been to others. They cared who I was now, and for the first time in years, I felt I could speak my truth without shrinking to fit anyone's expectations. I started writing, not for publication, but to witness myself. I wrote about my mother singing as she cooked, about my aging hands, about the quiet of a room free of pressure. The pages were where I found my voice again, not a loud or demanding one, but a true one, of a woman who'd lived, given, and was now learning to keep for herself. Daniel kept visiting, sometimes with Nana and Charlie, sometimes alone. He never brought Jessica, and I didn't ask why. The visits weren't filled with apologies or long explanations. They were simple, easy. I baked orange zest cookies, his childhood favorite. He fixed a squeaky bathroom hinge or swapped out an air filter without being asked. We watched old sitcoms, laughing at familiar scenes. The familiarity was there, but something had shifted. No more pressure, no need to prove my worth. In those moments, I remembered the old Daniel, the boy who fell asleep on my lap after park play dates, leaving sticky fingerprints on the fridge. But I also saw him now, a man learning to see his mother as a person, not just a role. One afternoon, I ran into an old law firm friend at the grocery store. She looked at me, surprised. "Ellen, you look different. Something change?" I smiled, told the truth. I learned to respect myself again. She asked if I was angry at my family. I shook my head. I was, but anger's heavy. I carried it long enough. What I felt now was serenity. Not because everything was resolved, but because I'd chosen not to let pain define me. One morning, I got a card from Daniel. Inside was a handwritten line, his scrawl still rushed like his schoolboy days. "I see you now." Just one sentence, no signature, no flourish, but I held that card for a long time. It wasn't an apology, not a promise, but an acknowledgement, and to me, that was worth more than any words. He saw me, not just his mom, not just the woman who sacrificed, but a woman with her own story, her own worth, needing no one's validation. I pinned the card to the fridge, not to show off, but to remind myself how far I'd come. I thought a lot about what happened. The house, the years of being sidelined, the decision to bring John to the party. It could have been a scandal, gossip fodder. But to me, it was the moment I stopped shrinking. I remembered Jessica's eyes when she realized I was prepared, not to destroy her, but to protect myself. I remembered Daniel's voice breaking as he said, "I didn't know." I believed him. But not knowing doesn't make things right. And forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. I'd paid a price for my silence, for years of serving without asking, for times I set myself aside to please others. But now I was learning to value myself. My little apartment, with its sunny balcony and yellow daisies, wasn't the final destination. It was a starting point where I built a life with me at the center, not the background. And in the stillness of these new days, I felt a word I hadn't dared say aloud in youth: sovereignty. I, Ellen Blake, was the one writing my story, and I was just beginning. I sat on my apartment's small balcony, a cup of mint tea cooling beside me, the sunset painting the distant trees gold. The evening breeze was cool, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass from the nearby park. This apartment, with its simple cream walls and slightly scratched hardwood floors wasn't the place I'd dreamed of in my youth. But now, at 68, it was my kingdom, a space where no one could push me aside, where no one could rewrite my story. I sipped my tea, smiling to myself. For the first time in years, I felt not just alive, but truly free. The journey to get here wasn't easy. That night, at Daniel and Jessica's anniversary party, when I placed the folder of documents on the table and stood to declare I wouldn't be invisible anymore, changed everything. I didn't wreck the room, didn't shout or accuse, but my presence, John's, and those papers shook the flimsy foundation Jessica had built. I left the party with my head high, not because I'd won, but because I'd reclaimed myself. In the weeks that followed, I left Daniel and Jessica's house, demanded my financial contribution back, and moved into this apartment. I learned to breathe in my own space, and now I was learning to live, truly live, in a way I'd never dared before. My little apartment was a declaration. I arranged it without anyone's rules. Family photos. Daniel at 5 with chubby cheeks, my mother in her floral wedding dress, sat on a wooden shelf, not for show, but because they warmed my heart. I bought a vase from a thrift market, filled it with yellow daisies every Saturday, and set it where the afternoon sun streamed through the window. I brewed tea in the chipped mug Jessica once called too tacky, and I lit lavender-scented candles, letting their fragrance fill the room. Every item, every choice, however small, was a reminder that I no longer had to shrink to fit others' expectations. Daniel started visiting more often, usually alone, sometimes with Nana and Charlie. The first time, he brought a bouquet of lilies, my favorite flower since he was a boy, when he'd tug me through Grandma's garden to show me the white blooms. He stepped into the apartment, looked around, touched the back of a chair, lingered at the balcony. "This place, you've made it a real home," he said, his voice low, as if realizing something bigger than his words. I nodded, said nothing, but inside I knew he was seeing me, not just his mom, but a woman with her own life, her own choices. Daniel's visits were never loud or dramatic. We drank coffee, talked about the kids, his work, small things like the weather, or an old movie we both liked. I baked orange zest cookies, his childhood favorite, and he fixed small things around the house, a creaky door hinge, a flickering light bulb, without me asking. Once, Nana and Charlie came, running around the apartment, giggling when they found the cookie tin I'd hidden in the kitchen. I told them stories about their dad as a kid, like the time he spilled jam on the rug and tried to hide it with a pillow. They laughed hard, and Daniel, lounging in the armchair, laughed too. But his eyes held a quiet pensiveness, as if remembering a version of himself he'd forgotten. Jessica never reached out. Not a call, not a text, not a card. At first, I wondered if I should feel hurt, but then I realized her silence wasn't rejection. It was freedom. I didn't need an apology or reconciliation to move forward. Some relationships don't need mending. They just need to be left behind, like a book you close after finishing. Jessica's absence was space, and I'd learned to use that space to rebuild myself. I began crafting a new rhythm, not based on being a mother or grandmother, but on being me. Ellen Blake, the woman who once ran a law office with a conductor's precision and was now running her life with the same resolve. I volunteered at a community legal aid office, doing simple tasks like filing, answering phones, or taking notes for young attorneys. The interns saw me as a sweet old lady, unaware I'd typed briefs that shook courtrooms or could spot a contract error from across the room. I didn't need them to know. My confidence came from knowing my own worth, not from others' recognition. I joined a book club at the local library, where women in their 60s and 70s met every Thursday, rain or shine. We read everything from romance to memoirs and debated about love, loss, regret, and the joy of aging. They didn't care who I'd been to others, they cared who I was now. And for the first time, I felt I could speak my truth without fear of judgment. One evening, discussing a book about forgiveness, a friend in the group asked if I'd forgiven my family. I thought for a moment, then said, "I'm not angry anymore. But forgiving doesn't mean I go back to a place where I'm not respected." They nodded, and in their eyes, I saw understanding. Not shallow sympathy, but the empathy of women who'd fought to be seen. I started writing, not for publication or an audience, but to record myself. I wrote about small things, my mother singing as she cooked, the smell of morning coffee with my husband, Michael, when he'd pour me a cup before I even sat down. I wrote about my hands, their wrinkles telling stories of work, love, and loss. I wrote about this apartment's stillness, not the silence of isolation, but the calm of freedom. The pages were where I rediscovered my voice, not to shout at the world, but to whisper to myself that I was still here, still mattered, still deserved. One morning, I received a card from Daniel. Inside was a handwritten line, his scrawl still hasty like his schoolboy days. "I see you now." Just one sentence, no signature, no embellishment. But I held that card for a long time, as if it were a treasure. It wasn't an apology, not a promise, but an acknowledgement that he saw me, not just his mom, not just the woman who'd sacrificed her life, but a woman with her own story, her own worth, needing no one's validation. I pinned the card to the fridge, not to show off, but to remind myself how far I'd come. I thought a lot about what happened. The house, the years of being sidelined, the moment I stood at the party with my folder and John's presence. It could have been a scandal, gossip fodder, but to me, it was the moment I stopped shrinking. I remembered Jessica's eyes when she realized I was prepared, not to destroy her, but to protect myself. I remembered Daniel's voice breaking as he said, "I didn't know." I believed him, but not knowing doesn't make things right. Forgiveness, to me, didn't mean forgetting or pretending the hurts didn't exist. It meant letting go of bitterness so I could move forward, lighter, stronger. I learned that peace has a price, and so does self-respect. The cost of staying silent, of always pleasing others, of setting myself aside, that cost was steeper than I'd realized. I'd paid it for decades, through forced smiles, unspoken words, violated boundaries. But at that party, and in the days after, I stopped paying. I set a value on myself, and I paid it generously, without regret. One afternoon, a neighbor asked if I ever felt lonely. I thought hard before answering. There were moments I missed Nana and Charlie, their tiny feet pattering through the house, their giggles when they found my hidden candy. I missed Daniel, not the Daniel now, but the boy who fell asleep on my lap after park playdates. But lonely, not quite. I felt expansive, free, and above all, I felt sovereign. A word I think women my age don't use enough. Sovereign, as if I were the queen of my own kingdom, with the right to shape my space, my time, my story. I kept writing, kept volunteering, kept meeting the women in my book club. I bought flowers from the market each week, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I walked in the nearby park, listening to birds and feeling the sun on my skin, unhurried, unpressured. I lived not to prove anything, but because I deserved to live, truly live, with all the joy and truth I'd once set aside for others. If I could tell any woman what I've learned, I'd say this. The moment someone tries to put you in your place, remember your place isn't negotiable. Your worth doesn't depend on circumstances. You're not background noise, not a placeholder. You're the whole story. And if you have to bring a lawyer to the table to be heard, do it. Because there's a peace that only comes when you stop paying for others' comfort with your own voice.